I was folding towels, thinking he was calling to check on me after their big Europe trip. I pressed answer and heard laughter, clinking glasses, airport noise. I was about to speak when I realized he had not hung up properly. I stayed still, listening, and in the next few seconds my world shifted. I heard what he thought of me, and that was the moment a different version of me woke up. If you're watching this, please like, subscribe, and tell me where you're from. That morning started like any other, quiet and simple, the kind of day that makes an older woman like me grateful for small routines. I had just finished tidying the living room, fluffing the same pillows I've had for years, then moved into the kitchen to stir the pot of soup simmering on the stove. The house felt warm, calm, and familiar, the only place that still held pieces of the life I built with my own 2 hands. I folded laundry at the dining table, humming under my breath, thinking about how my son and his wife were probably enjoying their trip across Europe. I pictured them exploring cafes, taking photos, laughing. I hoped they were safe, happy, and having the break they needed. I never held grudges, never complained, never asked for anything. Being a mother at my age meant giving more than receiving, and I accepted that a long time ago. When the phone rang, I smiled without even looking at the screen, certain it was my son calling to tell me they had landed somewhere new or tried some fancy dish he knew I wouldn't be able to pronounce. I answered with warmth in my voice, ready to hear about their adventures and ready to remind him to eat properly because travel can wear a person down fast. But the call didn't begin the way I expected. There was no greeting, no "Hi, Mom," none of the usual soft tone he used when he was in a good mood. Instead, I heard loud airport announcements, the wheels of suitcases rolling on tile floors, and voices, not to me, but around me. I realized immediately he hadn't meant to call. He must have accidentally dialed while putting his phone away. I opened my mouth to say, "Hello? Can you hear me?" But something in the background made me stop. I heard my daughter-in-law laughing, that loud, sharp laugh she always used when she wanted attention. I didn't want to intrude, so I stayed quiet, thinking the call would disconnect in a second. But it didn't. It stayed on, open completely, like a window I wasn't meant to look through. And through that window, I heard my own name. At first, I couldn't understand why they were talking about me on their vacation. I thought maybe they were planning a gift, or checking on me, or reminding each other to bring me something from their trip. But the tone was off. It was too light, too careless, too mocking. My heart slowed a little as I strained to hear better, still holding a dish towel in my hand. I took a seat because something in me sensed that standing would hurt. The laughter grew louder as their friends chimed in, and a coldness began creeping through me. They were talking about me, yes, but not with love, not with respect, not even with basic kindness. They were talking about me like I was a problem they needed to solve. My daughter-in-law's voice cut through the noise clearly, complaining about how exhausting it was to have me living alone in a big house, how they always had to check on me, and how they were tired of feeling responsible for me. I felt a sting, but I kept telling myself, maybe I'm misunderstanding, maybe they're stressed. But the next sentence ended that hope. My son's voice, the same boy I raised with everything I had, said something I will never forget. He laughed and said, "She'll manage. She's old, not helpless. Besides, she's a burden. Once we get back, we'll deal with it." The call kept running. I heard his words as if he was standing right beside me. A burden. The word echoed in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I felt something inside me tighten, not in anger yet, but in disbelief. I sat so still I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I thought maybe I misheard, maybe it wasn't him. But then he said it again, clearer this time, and others around him laughed as if it was a shared joke. My hands began to shake, but not enough for me to drop the phone. I held it tighter. I didn't speak, didn't cough, didn't breathe loudly. I knew that if I made a sound, the call would end, and I wouldn't hear the truth. And there was more truth waiting to punch me in the chest. My son went on about how once they returned from Europe, they would move me into a care home, sell my house, use the money for their future, and how it was better if I lived somewhere small and quiet so they wouldn't have to worry. The worst part wasn't the plan, it was the joy behind it. Their tone wasn't worried. It wasn't sad. It was excited. They were celebrating their freedom from me before they even took it. In that moment, something inside me changed completely. A quiet day became the day I woke up. After the call ended, I sat frozen for a long time, holding the phone like it was something poisonous. The house felt different now. The same walls, the same furniture, the same sunlight coming through the kitchen window, but everything suddenly carried a weight I had never felt before. I stood up slowly and walked to the living room, almost in a daze, replaying every word I heard. Their laughter, the tone, the carelessness, the cruelty said so casually between drinks at an airport. I kept telling myself I should calm down, that maybe they were joking, maybe they were drunk or tired or frustrated. But the truth was simple. They said those words because they meant them. And the fact they didn't even care if I heard told me everything I needed to know about my place in their life. I went to the front window and looked outside at the street I had lived on for more than 30 years. Every crack in the pavement, every tree I planted, every memory felt like part of my bones. This home was where my son grew up, where I taught him to ride a bike, where he cried after school, where he brought in stray animals, where I spent nights sewing clothes for him because I couldn't afford store-bought ones. Everything I had was poured into this house, and into him. And now I was hearing him plan to take it from me like it was nothing. A burden, a problem, something to be removed. The air in that room began to shift. The warmth felt dimmer. The silence grew heavier. I walked toward the hallway where all the photos hung. Birthdays, graduations, holidays, family trips. My son as a baby in my arms, his first Halloween costume, the day he won his first school trophy. All those moments stared back at me, but they didn't comfort me. Instead, they asked a quiet question. Where did the boy in these pictures go? The answer hurt deeply. He was still there, but he grew into a man who didn't remember what it cost me to raise him. He grew into someone who valued comfort more than family, money more than memories, and convenience more than loyalty. I reached for one of the frames and held it close, studying the young version of myself smiling on a beach with him, sitting in a little floaty beside me. I remembered how tightly he held my hand in those days, how scared he was of waves, how safe he felt when I carried him out of the water. And now, years later, he was willing to ship me off like old furniture. That memory didn't comfort me. It steadied me. It reminded me who I was before the heartbreak. I walked back into the kitchen because something inside me wanted to keep moving. The soup I had made earlier was still warm, simmering quietly like nothing had changed. I turned off the stove and sat down at the table, folding my hands slowly, deliberately. The house felt too quiet now, almost hollow. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, the wind outside brushed against the windows, all ordinary sounds, but I felt like the entire world had shifted a few inches out of place. Then another realization hit me. While they were laughing and planning to get rid of me, they were doing it with the confidence of people who believed I would accept whatever they decided. They thought I would nod politely, pack my bags, and go wherever they sent me. They thought I would cry quietly and follow their orders because I had always been gentle, always been patient, always been the one to bend. They had no idea I heard them. They had no idea I was already thinking ahead, already processing options, already stepping out of the version of me they believed they could control. The more I thought about their words, the more I understood something vital. They didn't just want my house, they wanted my silence. They wanted my compliance. They wanted my life to shrink so theirs could expand. And that was the moment my heartbreak slowly started turning into clarity. Clarity became focus. Focus became resolve. I realized I had a choice: to let their cruelty define me, or to let their cruelty free me. I wasn't ready to act yet, but something inside me had already broken loose from the shock. I looked around my house, my kitchen, my living room, my memories, and I felt a truth settle into me like a stone dropping into water. Nothing would ever be the same after what I heard, and nothing needed to be. I was still sitting at the table trying to understand everything when my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from my daughter-in-law. A simple message: "Hope you're doing okay. We'll call later." I stared at the screen, that polite little message written with the same hands that had clapped at the joke about putting me in a care home. Something inside me hardened. My son hadn't just slipped up on that call. He had revealed a truth he never intended for me to hear. And the second I realized that, the final pieces of their plan came into focus. I stood up and walked to my bedroom, opened the top drawer of my dresser, and pulled out the small locked box where I kept old papers, the deed to my house, insurance documents, and a folder with my financial records. Everything they wanted, everything they assumed would automatically become theirs. For the first time, I looked at those papers not as a record of my life, but as a target they had painted on me. When I opened the deed, the memory of signing it came rushing back. The pride of buying my home with money earned from years of sacrifices, late shifts, and long nights. I remembered how excited my son had been the day we moved in, running through the house choosing which room would be his. Back then, he used to say, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll take care of you." I believed him. Every mother does. But now, the same child was planning to take everything I built and move me aside like a box of old clothes. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the hum of the ceiling fan, letting the weight of the betrayal settle into something more solid. He thought I didn't know the law. He thought I didn't understand ownership. He thought age had made me soft, blind, and easy to control. What he didn't know was that age had also made me observant. At my age, you don't speak every thought, but you hear every tone. You don't react to every insult, but you remember every intention. I began to piece together moments that hadn't made sense before. A few weeks earlier, my daughter-in-law had casually asked for the spare house key for emergencies. My son had asked if I ever thought about downsizing. They had mentioned more than once that taking care of a home at my age could be stressful. At the time, I brushed off those comments as concern. But today, with their words echoing in my mind, I finally saw the truth. Those weren't concerns. They were tests, soft pushes to see whether I would resist or surrender. Now, hearing the slip on the call, everything lined up perfectly. They planned to come home from Europe with smiles and souvenirs, sit me down at this very table, and tell me it was time for the next phase of my life. They would act sad, act supportive, claim it was for my safety, and insist the house should be sold to help with costs. And I would be expected to thank them for it. A quiet anger spread through me. Not the loud kind that makes people throw things or scream. No, this was the cold, steady kind that builds slowly when you realize people you loved took advantage of your softness. I walked back to the living room and looked around again, but this time with a sharper eye. The photo frames, the furniture, the decorations, they weren't just sentimental pieces anymore. They were evidence of a life I lived, a life I earned, a life no one had the right to take from me. I walked into the hallway and touched the walls, remembering how I painted them myself one summer when money was tight and hiring help was impossible. I replaced the floors piece by piece. I planted every flower in the garden, and now they planned to sell my hard work like it was some unwanted item at a garage sale. I sat down on the couch, my hands steady now. The shock was gone. The hurt was still there, but it was no longer controlling me. Instead, it was shaping me into someone who could finally see the truth without blinking. My son's slip, that accidental phone call, was the universe cutting the curtain open so I could see what was happening behind it. Without that call, I might have trusted them when they returned. I might have believed their rehearsed stories. I might have stepped quietly into the very trap they were building for me. But that slip changed everything. It gave me time. It gave me knowledge. And it gave me the chance to act before they did. In that moment, sitting alone in my own living room, I whispered something to myself, not in anger, not in fear, but in final acceptance. They think I'm weak. They're wrong. That was the moment I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I sat alone in the quiet of that house, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself look back at the long road that led me here. Not the road my son remembers, not the story his wife knows, but the real one, the one with the sacrifices, the choices, the nights I cried alone, and the days I held everything together with nothing but willpower. They think I'm soft, fragile, unaware. They think age has made me weak. But they don't know the life that shaped me long before they were old enough to form an opinion about me. I remembered the years after my husband died, when I was just 38 and suddenly responsible for a child and a mortgage I had no idea how to manage. My husband had been the planner, the saver, the one who understood numbers. I was the one who made a home, took care of birthdays, cooked, cleaned, and gave comfort. When he passed, I didn't get time to sit and mourn like other widows. I had to figure out how to keep the lights on, and my son fed. I worked days at the grocery store and nights sewing clothes for neighbors. I sold baked goods every weekend at the farmer's market. Some nights, I fell asleep at the kitchen table with threads still wrapped around my fingers, but I kept going because my son needed stability. He needed normal, and I gave it to him, even when it tore pieces out of me. I remembered the day I almost lost the house, back when the roof repair cost more than my savings. I stood in the bank lobby shaking, terrified they'd take everything. Then I met a loan officer who told me something that never left my mind. Always keep one thing in your name that nobody can touch. That day, I made a decision. This house would always stay mine, no matter what. I refinanced it in my own name. Paid every cent, worked extra shifts, fought through exhaustion, built this home piece by piece with my own hands and sacrifices. My son never saw the nights I went without dinner so he could have enough. He never saw the months I stretched $10 across 4 weeks. He never saw the envelopes of cash I hid under the mattress to keep us safe. I didn't tell him about the days I cried alone in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear. Children remember comfort, not the cost of it. And yet, even with all that struggle, I remembered the moments of joy. The simple ones. His first day of school when he clung to my skirt. The Christmas morning I bought him a used bicycle, and he acted like it was the best gift in the world. The nights we sat by the heater reading library books because we couldn't afford outings. Those memories once filled me with warmth. Now, they pressed down on me like a weight, a reminder that the child I raised with love became a man who saw me as an item to sell. I remembered the times I helped him as an adult, the loans I never demanded back, the emergencies I pulled him out of, the bills I covered so he could get back on his feet. I even gave him a copy of my house key when he first got married because I thought family meant safety, family meant trust. I never imagined he'd use that key one day to plan my removal. But as I sat there, another truth rose in me, a truth I had kept hidden even from him. Years ago, when I finally paid off the house, I quietly made sure the deed listed only my name, just mine. No joint ownership, no transfer, no loopholes. I kept it simple and clean. My lawyer told me it was the smartest decision I ever made. And now, sitting alone in that kitchen after hearing my son's words, I realized that old decision might save me. Because they didn't know the house was fully mine. They didn't know they couldn't sell it. They didn't know I didn't need them to take care of me. They didn't know I still had my own strength, my own savings, my own mind. They didn't know I wasn't the helpless old woman they thought I was. Every memory, every struggle, every lesson built into me began to surface, not with anger, but with clarity. I wasn't remembering the past to feel sorrow. I was remembering it to find my spine again, to remind myself of the woman who fought through worse storms than this, to remind myself that survival shaped me, not comfort. And with each memory, my heart steadied, my breath deepened, and a new feeling began to replace the heartbreak, a quiet strength rising like something I had forgotten I possessed. They thought I had no power. They thought I had nothing left. But they were wrong. I still had myself. I still had my mind. I still had my choices. And most importantly, I still had my home. After that long moment of remembering, I stood up with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not panic, just a slow, settling understanding of what had been happening right under my nose. When pain finally clears, you begin to see things you ignored for too long, and that's exactly what started happening as I walked through my home. For the first time, I noticed the little signs, the tiny red flags that seemed harmless when they first appeared, but now looked like bright warnings I had simply failed to connect. I went into my bedroom and opened the drawer where I usually kept my bank cards. 2 cards were missing, ones I never used often, but I always kept them in the same place. I checked again, slower this time, as if they would magically appear. But the space was empty. My wallet felt thinner. My checkbook slightly shifted. I remembered my son stopping by last week, just to check on me. He had gone into my bedroom saying he needed a charger. I thought nothing of it at the time. Now, I replayed the memory with new eyes. His visit was quick, his smile too forced, his questions too pointed. He asked if I still used automatic bill pay, if I kept cash laying around, if I ever thought about downsizing. I had brushed it off as casual conversation. But standing there now, I felt the truth sink in. He wasn't checking on me. He was checking on what he could take. I went into the kitchen and opened the drawer with my spare keys. The little red key, the one for my safe, was missing too. My heart tightened, not out of fear, but out of confirmation. Someone had been preparing for something long before that call I accidentally overheard. My daughter-in-law especially had become strangely attentive the past month. She would sigh loudly every time she visited, talk about how big houses are too much work for older people, and joke about care homes as if they were vacation resorts. A few days before they left for Europe, she had asked me very casually, "Mom, do you really want to spend your last years cleaning this place alone?" The softness in her tone was sweet, almost kind. But thinking about it now, that sweetness felt like honey covering a hook. She wasn't worried about my comfort. She was laying the foundation to take my home. I moved through the living room slowly, noticing how their last visit felt different. My daughter-in-law had insisted on helping me sort through piles of mail. She opened envelopes without asking. She put aside documents she didn't need to see. Now I understood why she lingered over any paper that mentioned insurance, property, or savings. She was studying my life like a blueprint, searching for an opening. And then I remembered something that made my stomach twist. Last month, she asked if I had ever considered giving her and my son temporary access to my accounts in case of an emergency. At the time, I laughed lightly and said, "What kind of emergency would need that?" She smiled and said, "Oh, just to make things easier for you." But now, those words echoed like a threat disguised as kindness. They weren't planning to help me. They were planning to replace me, and they needed the house and my savings to do it. I walked to the small bookshelf in the hallway where I kept old documents. When I opened the cabinet, a stack of papers was out of order. Someone had gone through them recently. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. I pulled the papers out and found that one of the property tax receipts was missing. That receipt had my full legal ownership listed clearly. Why would that be the one removed? Because if they wanted to take this house, they needed to understand what stood in their way. And that paper held the answer. Every missing item, every strange visit, every odd question began to line up like pieces of a puzzle I had never wanted to solve. They weren't waiting to make me a burden. They had already decided I was one. They were preparing for a future where I didn't have a say. My son, the boy I raised, was ready to rearrange my entire life while sipping champagne in an airport. My emotions didn't explode. They didn't break. They settled, heavy but firm. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply absorbed the truth. Everything they had been doing wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a plan, a slow, careful plan built on greed, entitlement, and the belief that I was too old, too slow, too trusting to notice. They wanted my home. They wanted my money. They wanted control. And they thought I would just let them take it. But as I stood there, feeling the last pieces fall into place, one thought rose above everything else. If they wanted a future without me, I could give them exactly that. Just not in the way they expected. I walked back to the living room and sank slowly into my old armchair, the one with the faded arms and the soft cushion that had held me through every season of my life. For the first time in years, I felt its weight press up against me instead of comforting me. The room was quiet, still, almost painfully so, the kind of silence that forces you to face yourself. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, staring at nothing, and letting every emotion rise one by one until they stopped feeling like waves and started feeling like facts. The first emotion was shock, not the sharp kind that makes you gasp, but the slow, sinking kind that settles in your bones. I kept thinking, how did we get here? How did the child I carried, fed, protected, and loved grow into someone who spoke about me like a burden? I replayed his voice in my head over and over. She's a burden now. Those words cut deeper each time. Then came heartbreak, heavy, quiet, and strangely calm. I had always believed that no matter what happened in life, family would remain a safe place. I believed respect was natural between blood. I believed a mother's sacrifices meant something, but sitting there, I finally understood that belief did not match the reality in front of me. My son didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as something to manage, something to move out of the way. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I let the truth sit beside me like an unwelcome guest. Grief wasn't new to me. I had buried my parents, my husband, friends from younger days. But this grief was different. This was the grief of losing someone who was still alive. The grief of watching the bond you built with your own hands crumble as if it never existed. As I sat there, memories flashed across my mind, not in dramatic scenes, but small ones. The nights I stayed awake with him when he had a fever. The mornings I walked him to school with a lunchbox I packed carefully to make sure he had enough to eat. The years I worked double shifts to keep the lights on and food on the table. All the holidays I made special even when I had nothing. All the birthdays where the gift didn't matter. It was my face he searched for in the crowd. Every memory made me ache, not because they hurt me now, but because they were evidence of how far we had drifted. I wasn't mourning what he had become. I was mourning the mother I had been, the woman who believed her child would never let her down. Somewhere inside that heartbreak, anger tried to spark, but it didn't flame, it didn't burn. It came as a whisper instead, a quiet voice saying, "Enough." I realized I had spent so many years giving love freely that I forgot love was supposed to return in some form. Respect was supposed to return. Gratitude was supposed to return. But I had received none of that. And understanding this didn't make me bitter. It made me clear. Sitting there, I asked myself the question I had avoided for years. If he sees me as a burden, why am I holding on to him so tightly? The question hurt, but the answer came easier than expected. I wasn't holding on to him. I was holding on to the memory of who he used to be. The little boy who ran into my arms. The teenager who cried into my shoulder when life confused him. The young man who promised I would always have a place in his world. That boy was gone, and the man who replaced him had made his intentions brutally clear. Then something inside me shifted, not dramatically, but steadily. The fear I felt earlier began to fade. The confusion loosened its grip. The sadness settled into something softer, something that didn't control me anymore. That silence around me, the same silence that had felt so heavy at first, began to feel like space. Space to think, space to breathe, space to choose. I realized I didn't need to confront him. I didn't need to beg for respect or fight for a place in a home that no longer felt like mine. The real confrontation was happening right here, inside myself. I was choosing whether to stay in a life where I was not wanted or to step into a life where I could finally be free from their control. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about teaching them a lesson. It was about reclaiming my dignity. That evening, as the sun softened and the house filled with warm light, I made a decision so quietly that even I didn't realize at first how powerful it was. I decided I would not wait for them to push me out. I would walk out on my own terms. I would not sit here hoping for love that wasn't coming. I would not give them the chance to take away the home I built. In that moment, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel weak. I felt steady. I felt awake. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like my life actually belonged to me. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity, the kind that doesn't shout or rush, but settles into your bones like a steady heartbeat. I moved through the house slowly, touching things I had dusted for decades, opening drawers I knew by feel, looking at the life I had built piece by piece. And instead of grief pulling at me, a new feeling stepped forward. Control. Quiet, firm, absolute control. I realized I didn't have to wait for anyone to decide my fate. They already told me what they planned to do with me. Now it was my turn to decide what I would do with myself. I started by sitting at my desk and pulling out a notebook. My hands felt steady, my breathing even. I wrote down every account I owned, every password, every bank, every bill, every asset. For the first time in years, I took inventory of my own life, not because someone demanded it, not because anyone was pressuring me, but because I wanted to see the truth of what I had. And the truth was simple. Everything they talked about taking was still legally mine. Every document had my name. Every signature was mine. Every right belonged to me alone. As I turned each page, my shock began to transform into something sharper, a quiet determination. I didn't need a confrontation. I didn't need a dramatic scene. What I needed was a plan, a clean, simple plan that would protect me by removing myself from their reach before they even returned from their trip. I opened the drawer where I kept my important papers and pulled out the deed to the house. The sight of my name printed across it felt different now. It felt empowering. This house wasn't theirs to take. It wasn't theirs to sell. It wasn't theirs to decide anything about. The moment I accepted that reality fully, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Then I picked up the phone and called a realtor, a woman I knew from church who had always treated me kindly. She answered on the second ring, cheerful as always. I told her I needed a private, immediate sale. No open houses, no signs on the lawn, quiet, fast, discreet. She didn't ask many questions, and I appreciated that. She simply said she would be there within an hour. I hung up the phone and felt a calm settle over me like a blanket. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing myself for the first time in decades. While I waited, I walked through the house room by room and began separating what mattered from what didn't. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't sentimental. I picked up items with the same clarity I once used to pack my son's school lunches when we were running late. Whatever I truly needed went into the keep pile. Whatever was just clutter or held painful memories now went into the leave behind pile. By the time the realtor arrived, I had more clarity than I'd had in years. She toured the house, impressed with its condition, its size, the beautiful backyard I had tended with my own hands. She told me it would sell fast. And it did. Within 48 hours, I had 3 offers, all above asking price. I accepted the cleanest one, signed the paperwork, and watched as decades of responsibility shifted legally out of my hands, not into my son's hands, not into anyone else's hands, just gone from my life entirely, exactly how I wanted it. Next, I went to the bank. I closed accounts, opened new ones, transferred funds, changed passwords, updated security settings. Everything they thought they could access disappeared with a few signatures and a calm conversation with a bank manager who treated me with respect. It felt almost surreal how easy it was to take back control once I decided to stop assuming I needed anyone's permission. I arranged for movers to come the next morning. They packed everything I marked as keep: my clothes, my photos, a few pieces of furniture, my books, and small items that carried meaning. The house was empty within hours, completely empty. No echo of my life left behind. No trace of the woman they thought they controlled. No comfort waiting for them when they returned. Before I walked out for the last time, I stood in the living room, the same place where my heart had broken just one day earlier, and I felt only peace. Real, grounded peace. Then I placed a single envelope on the entry table. No anger, no long explanations, just the truth they needed to face, a truth they had earned. When I closed the door, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My life wasn't in that house anymore. My life was already moving forward, step by step, toward a place where their voices, their plans, their selfishness could no longer touch me. I wasn't running from them. I was walking toward myself. The timing could not have been more perfect. By the time my son and his wife returned from their long, glamorous European trip, weeks of posting photos in front of palaces, beaches, and luxury hotels, my old house had already changed hands. The new owners had moved in. My life had moved on. And everything they thought they still controlled had shifted completely outside their reach. But of course, they didn't know any of this yet. They were landing, smiling, stretching after a long flight, posting one last vacation picture, and telling their friends they couldn't wait to finally fix Mom's situation. I knew the exact moment they arrived home because my realtor texted me with a simple message: "They're here." I imagined it clearly. The way the car probably rolled into the driveway, how my son most likely sighed dramatically and complained about the garbage bin being placed differently, how my daughter-in-law probably stepped out adjusting her sunglasses and rolling her eyes about the front lawn. They always came back from trips acting bigger than the house they lived in, as if stepping into that front door was beneath them. But this time, something was different. When they walked up to the door, dragging their shiny suitcases behind them, they noticed there was no welcome mat. The porch decor was missing, the curtains were drawn, little things that would confuse someone who was paying attention, but they never paid attention to anything except themselves. My son reached for his key the way he always did, probably already planning to ask me why the porch light was moved. He inserted the key, twisted it, and nothing. It didn't turn. He tried again. Harder, then even harder. His wife asked him what he was doing, impatient as usual, so he tried the second key, the spare key, the key they thought would open any door in that house. Nothing worked. The lock had been replaced, and there wasn't a key in the world that could open it for them anymore. I imagined the moment confusion slowly crept into their faces. That slow, dawning realization that something wasn't adding up. My son probably muttered something like, "She changed the locks?" while his wife frowned and said, "Why would she do that?" But confusion only lasted a moment before panic took over. They tried every window, even the back door. They circled the house, raising their voices, whispering curses under their breath, trying not to alert the neighbors. But the neighbors noticed. Some watched from behind curtains. Others stepped outside, ready to greet the homeowners who weren't actually homeowners at all. And then, of course, the new owners opened the door. A young couple they had never seen before, maybe holding coffee, maybe confused, maybe even amused. "Can we help you?" they probably asked. My son and his wife must have frozen. What do you say to strangers living in the home you thought you would one day inherit? My daughter-in-law probably tried to assert herself the way she always did, insisting, "This is our house." But the new owners had paperwork, legal, signed, legitimate paperwork. Paperwork that said otherwise. Paperwork with my name and their name. Nothing tying that house to my son at all. And that was the moment everything collapsed. My son must have felt the ground shift under him, realizing he wasn't just locked out of a house. He was locked out of the life he assumed would be handed to him. While he stood there in shock, trying to make sense of the reality in front of him, the new owners pointed to something taped neatly on the front door. An envelope, with my handwriting. Familiar, unmistakable. Probably a punch to the stomach just seeing it. I know exactly what happened next. He pulled the envelope off the door with shaking hands, his wife hovering behind him, her face draining of color. They opened it right there on the porch, in front of everyone watching. And inside, instead of an apology or an explanation or a plea for understanding, they found instead the truth laid out plainly. A photo of the empty house the moment the movers cleared the last box. A copy of the sale contract with my signature and the buyer's. A receipt showing the full amount deposited into an account they didn't even know existed. And one final note, handwritten, simple, calm, and sharper than any knife they could have used against me. A burden did this. I know my son. I know exactly how his expression must have twisted. Shock turning to disbelief, disbelief turning to anger, anger turning into the realization that I wasn't where he expected me to be, and I never would be again. They probably called my phone a dozen times. They probably tried to track me. They probably yelled at each other. But the truth was the same no matter how many times they read that note. They were no longer part of my decisions, no longer part of my home, no longer part of my future unless I allowed it. They returned from Europe expecting comfort, security, and a mother they could push around. Instead, they came home to an empty house, locked doors, strangers in the living room, and a note that ended the version of me they depended on. For the first time in years, I had the power. When the shock finally settled into their bones, the real ugliness began to show. My phone started ringing almost immediately, first my son, then his wife, then both of them over and over again. I didn't answer, of course. I watched the calls flash across the screen from a safe, quiet hotel room in another city, a room booked using one of the new accounts they knew nothing about. But the voicemails they left told me everything I needed to know about who they truly were without the comfort of my house under their feet. The first voicemail was full of forced calm, my son trying to control his voice, trying to sound reasonable. "Mom, we're confused. Something must have happened with the locks. Can you please come home and explain this?" But I could hear the strain, the fear, the disbelief, the cracking certainty that his future wasn't as secure as he believed. The next voicemail? A completely different tone. His wife took the phone. "How could you do this? Are you insane? We need that house. We already told people we're planning to renovate. We have plans." Plans. That word settled on me like dust. They had plans for my home, plans made before my body even had a chance to rest, before they gave a thought to my comfort or care. But the third voicemail was the truest one of all. My son's voice, cold, sharp, angry. "You can't do this, Mom. This is our future. You owe us." Owe them. For what? For raising him? For sacrificing decades of my life? for giving him a home he never paid a cent for. And then, the last voicemail of the night. One sentence, one line spoken through clenched teeth. "You're a selfish old woman." There it was. The real son behind the mask. But while they were leaving messages, yelling and bargaining and blaming, they were also scrambling in the background, trying desperately to climb out of the hole they dug for themselves. I knew because the new owners called me. They said my son showed up angry, demanding the mix-up be fixed. Then his wife tried crying, then threatening, then insisting they had rights. But the papers were clear. They had none. My lawyer also updated me. My son had tried calling the title company, attempting to reverse the sale. He told them he was the family representative. Except he wasn't on the deed. He had never been on the deed. He wasn't even a legal occupant. He lived there out of my generosity. When he learned this, he apparently lost control, shouting at the representative, demanding they fix it, as if the world would bend the way I always had. But not anymore. Then came the financial consequences. He checked my old bank accounts, the ones he used to peek into, the ones he thought he would inherit. Empty, transferred, relocated. In my name only, safeguarded by legal measures he couldn't touch. His wife checked the garage where she had stored bags of items she planned to sell when Mom moves out. Gone. Every last item removed before the sale. They tried entering the house again, but the new owners threatened to call the police. That was when the neighbors stepped outside, watching the scene unfold like a neighborhood drama. And humiliation does something strange to people. It pushes their real character to the surface. My daughter-in-law immediately blamed my son, screaming that he should have handled his mother better, saying this was his fault for not controlling the situation. My son yelled back that she pushed him into rushing decisions, telling him that his mother was weak enough to manipulate. Two people who used to act united against me suddenly turned against each other when the money and the house vanished. And just like that, all the loyalty they claimed to have for each other evaporated the moment their comfort was threatened. That night, after the screaming, the phone calls, the begging, and the blame game, they sent one final message. A text, 6 words, cold, simple, revealing. "Where did you go? We need you." Not, "We miss you." Not, "We're sorry." Not, "We were wrong." Just, "We need you." They didn't need me. They needed what they believed they were entitled to: my house and my savings and my future, my life's work. And now, they had none of it. Their true character was exposed, not when they thought they had power, but the moment it was taken away from them. That is the day I realized something important. I wasn't a burden. I was the foundation they stood on, and once I removed it, they fell. When the noise of their anger finally faded and my phone stopped lighting up with calls, messages, and desperate attempts to reach me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Quiet. Not the heavy quiet of sadness, not the choking quiet of disappointment, but a clean, calm quiet. A quiet that felt like air after a long storm. I sat in my new little rental cottage, a place that didn't hold memories of slammed doors or whispered insults, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe without feeling like I owed someone an apology. The cottage was nothing grand. It didn't need to be. It had a porch with 2 rocking chairs, a kitchen with sunlight that warmed the floors in the morning, and a bedroom that smelled of lavender from the little sachets the landlord left for me. It felt like a space meant for healing, not for surviving. I unpacked my things slowly, choosing only what mattered: photos of my youth, letters from old friends, the quilt my mother stitched decades ago, the ceramic bowl my husband used to put his keys in. I brought memories that reminded me of who I was before life became heavy. Every morning, I walked to the nearby park with a cup of tea. No rush, no demands, no voices telling me what I owed them or what I should do. Just me, the birds, and the feeling of space, real space, emotional space. a kind I had denied myself for years without noticing. And in those walks, I began to realize something else. I wasn't grieving the loss of my son. I was grieving the version of him I created in my mind. The one who loved me unconditionally. The one I believed still saw me as home. That version didn't exist anymore. Maybe he never had. But accepting that truth didn't break me. It freed me. After settling in, I started attending a local senior center twice a week. I met women who had lived through more than people ever imagined. Widows, grandmothers, caretakers, women abandoned after giving everything. And when I shared a small part of my story, they didn't look shocked. They didn't look surprised. They nodded. They understood. One woman said softly, "Sometimes the children we raise grow into people we wouldn't choose to know as adults." That sentence landed deep in my chest. It wasn't cruel, it was true. Slowly, I built a routine that didn't revolve around waiting for someone to appreciate me. I gardened. I cooked simple meals for myself. I reread old books I never had the time for. I even joined a community knitting group, not because I needed to belong somewhere, but because I deserved to. With each small step, I reclaimed parts of myself I had given up over the years without noticing. Meanwhile, my son kept calling, less often now, but always with the same line. "We need to talk. Just call me back." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I miss you." Not, "I was wrong." Just a demand for my return. And each time I saw his name flash on my screen, I felt nothing but distance, clean, healthy distance. I had nothing left to give him, and he had nothing left to take. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the trees, turning everything gold. It struck me that peace doesn't always come from fixing what's broken. Sometimes it comes from walking away, from choosing yourself after years of being chosen last, from understanding you don't have to endure disrespect just because you share blood. And that was when the truth of my situation settled into a single simple thought. I didn't lose a home. I didn't lose a son. I didn't lose a family. I lost a version of my life that was built on unequal love and unspoken pain. What I gained was control, choice, freedom, and peace. Peace that wasn't borrowed or conditional or temporary. Peace that was mine. Now, I wake up with gratitude instead of dread. I live in a place that feels like safety instead of obligation. I laugh more. I rest more. I expect less and appreciate more. The moral is simple, and I hope every woman my age hears it clearly. When someone shows you exactly what you mean to them, believe them, and then decide what you're willing to be. Because disappearing isn't running away. Sometimes disappearing is how you finally return to yourself.